Welcome to my Ancient History channel. This story is long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand what power really costs. I invite you to settle into the quiet of the night. Let the silence fill your room and soften your mind. Where are you listening from in this fleeting moment? Allow the shadows to carry you back over 2,000 years. Leave your modern anxieties behind, for tonight we step into a world where survival demands absolute brilliance. Chapter 1. Power is never inherited without a blood price attached to the gold. You sit in the cool marble shadows of the great palace of Alexandria, listening to the distant hum of 500,000 voices echoing across the harbor. The year is 69 before the Common Era, but time means nothing when you are born into a dynasty that has ruled for 3 centuries. You are just a child, yet you already understand that the golden walls surrounding you are simply a magnificent cage. Your father, the pharaoh, wears the crown, but you see the tremor in his hands. While your siblings play ignorant games of leisure, you spend your hours deep inside the great library, absorbing the accumulated knowledge of human civilization. You read Aristotle and Plato, but philosophy offers no shield against a Roman sword. Therefore, you master the complex art of language, forcing your tongue to shape the syllables of 9 different tongues. You are the very first of your Greek bloodline to actually speak the native language of the Egyptian people you are destined to command. You realize early that true control relies on perception much more than physical strength. You watch the ambassadors arrive from every corner of the known world, bringing silks, spices, and whispered threats. You study their faces, reading their hidden desires and their silent fears. Why do men of great intelligence fall so easily to flattery? You notice that ambition is a universal weakness, a crack in the armor that can be leveraged if you possess the patience to listen closely while others speak too much. Look at the modern world you have temporarily left behind tonight. Do human beings still not trade their integrity for the illusion of superiority? The corridors of modern corporate empires and political halls operate on the exact same psychological mechanics that govern your ancient Egyptian court. Human nature does not evolve. It merely changes its wardrobe. You understand that to survive in a world commanded by ruthless men, you must become something vastly more dangerous than a beautiful woman. You must become a flawless strategy. You will soon learn that a crown does not shield your mind from terror. It only ensures that your enemies will never stop hunting you. Chapter 2. A throne secured by foreign swords is merely a glorified prisoner's chair. You are 11 years old when the illusion of absolute power shatters into irreparable pieces. The streets of Alexandria, usually filled with the scent of jasmine and roasting spices, now reek of smoke and furious rebellion. Your father, the man who claims to be a living god, is driven from his own palace by a mob of angry nobles and starving citizens. You watch his divine authority dissolve in a single afternoon, replaced by the frantic terror of a mortal man fleeing for his very life. The voyage across the Mediterranean Sea is fraught with the constant threat of capture or drowning. You stand on the swaying deck of a merchant vessel, the salty spray stinging your face, realizing that royal blood offers absolutely no buoyancy in a raging storm. The ocean does not care if you are a princess or a peasant. This harsh natural indifference becomes your first true lesson in political philosophy. Nature honors only strength and adaptability, discarding the weak without a second thought. You arrive in the great city of Rome, and the sights immediately overwhelm your senses. It is not a city of golden palaces like your home, but a brutal, sweating metropolis constructed of brick, mud, and unrelenting ambition. You walk through the narrow, crowded streets, hearing the constant clatter of iron cartwheels and the shouting of ambitious merchants. You begin to understand that this capital functions as a giant, hungry machine, fueled entirely by the resources of conquered nations and the sweat of millions of slaves. Your father, once worshipped as a deity by millions of Egyptians, must now debase himself before the Roman senators. You sit quietly in the shadows of imposing villas, watching him beg for legions to reclaim his lost throne. He offers them stolen from ancient temples, promising future tributes that will utterly bankrupt your homeland. You witness the smug, condescending smiles on the faces of Roman politicians as they weigh his desperation against their own financial gain. True power resides in the ability to make others beg. Consider the modern hierarchies that govern your current existence. Do we not still witness leaders mortgaging the future of their nations to secure their immediate political survival? The mechanics of debt and dependency remain entirely unchanged across the millennia. Whether it is an ancient king offering grain to Rome or a modern state surrendering its resources to global financial institutions, the psychology of subjugation is identical. You watch your father sell Egypt's soul simply to wear a hollow crown for a few more meaningless years. During these long years of humiliating exile, you do not weep like a frightened child. Instead, you become a silent, meticulous observer of Roman political machinery. You study the factional disputes that divide the Senate, noting how personal greed frequently overrides national interest. You map the invisible web of favors, blackmail, and alliances that truly govern this violent republic. You learn that Romans respect raw strength above all things, but they can be easily manipulated by their insatiable hunger for wealth, luxury, and exotic prestige. When your father finally secures the necessary Roman legions, the price paid is catastrophic. You return to Alexandria behind a wall of foreign shields, knowing that the citizens staring at you harbor deep, unspoken hatred. Your older sister, Berenice IV, who had usurped the throne during your absence, is swiftly dragged from her chambers. You watch coldly as her head is severed upon your father's order. The scent of sibling blood stains the marble floors, teaching you the absolute ruthlessness required to maintain a throne. A crown secured by foreign debt is nothing more than a beautiful shackle around the neck of the ruler. Roman soldiers now patrol the bustling streets of Alexandria, their heavy hobnailed boots echoing through the ancient corridors of your palace. They behave not as honored guests, but as arrogant occupiers waiting for their promised payment. You see the humiliation in the eyes of your own palace guards who must defer to these grunting foreigners. You realize that Egypt is no longer a sovereign kingdom, it is a vassal state. This realization does not break your spirit. It forges your resolve into cold, unyielding iron. You swear a silent oath to the ancient gods of the Nile that you will never tolerate such dependency when your time comes. You understand that defeating Rome through direct military confrontation is a mathematical impossibility. Their endless supply of iron and men would crush your armies in a single campaign. Therefore, you must conquer them from the inside, using their own corrupt bureaucracy and personal vices as your primary weapons. You spend your teenage years carefully cultivating relationships with the Roman officers stationed in your capital. You do not behave with the arrogance of traditional royalty. Instead, you employ flattery, intellectual stimulation, and calculated generosity. You learn how to speak to a Roman general so that he believes your ideas are actually his own. You master the delicate art of appearing helpful, while secretly gathering intelligence about their troop movements, supply lines, and command structures. Every conversation becomes a calculated move in an invisible game of chess. The burden of this endless deception weighs heavily upon your shoulders in the quiet hours of the night. The loneliness of authority begins to isolate you from everyone you know. You cannot trust your teachers, for they might be Roman spies. You cannot trust your remaining siblings, for they harbor the same treacherous ambitions that doomed your fallen sister. You are entirely alone in a palace filled with thousands of servants, a solitary mind trying to keep a dying empire afloat on a sea of blood. Reflect upon the crushing weight of solitary responsibility in your own modern life. Have you ever found yourself surrounded by people, yet profoundly unable to share the true depth of your fears? The anxieties of maintaining a carefully curated public image while silently managing internal crises transcend time. You must project absolute confidence during the day, even as your mind races, with terrifying scenarios the moment you close your eyes. Survival demands that you become a masterpiece of emotional concealment, never revealing the terror beneath the gold. When your father suddenly perishes, leaving you to rule jointly with your 10-year-old brother, the real nightmare begins. The kingdom you inherit is bankrupt, fractured, and heavily mortgaged to violent foreign creditors. The nobility whispers about your intellectual independence, preferring the pliable stupidity of your young brother. The eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles begin plotting in the shadows before your father's body is even embalmed. You feel the noose slowly tightening around your neck, realizing that your greatest enemies share your very own dining table. You do not panic, for panic is the ultimate luxury of the powerless. You begin reviewing the financial ledgers, identifying corrupt officials, and quietly reassigning them before they can strike. You meet with the high priests of Memphis, securing their divine validation to ensure the peasantry remains loyal to your name. You attempt to manage the staggering Roman debt by reforming the tax collection system, squeezing every ounce of efficiency from the bureaucracy without pushing the starving citizens into another violent revolt. You are walking a razor's edge. But intelligence alone cannot defeat entrenched bureaucratic treachery. Despite your flawless logic and desperate efforts, the coup against you is orchestrated with brutal efficiency. Your brother's handlers control the royal guard, and you are suddenly forced to flee, the only home you have ever known. Once again, you find yourself in exile, stripped of your royal titles and hunted like a common criminal in the dusty wastes of the desert. You learn that being right does not guarantee survival when ignorance holds the swords. In the harsh silence of the unforgiving desert, you stare into the blazing fire at night. You have lost the palaces, the treasury, and the armies, but you have not lost your most lethal weapon, your mind. You realize that despair is a useless emotion that only hastens defeat. You begin formulating a plan so audacious, so incredibly dangerous, that it borders on madness. You will not beg the Romans for help like your cowardly father did. You will force them to treat you as an absolute equal. The true nature of power reveals itself only when you have lost everything else. You must strip away all illusions of entitlement and face the cold reality of your situation. You gather your few remaining loyal supporters and begin raising a mercenary army from the dust of Syria. You understand that history does not reward the righteous. It only rewards the relentless. You prepare to roll the dice on a gamble that will either restore your divine crown or leave your lifeless body rotting in the endless sand. The heaviest chains are not made of forged iron, but of the compromises we make just to stay alive. Chapter 3. Treachery is seldom born from sudden malice, but slowly incubates in the warm shadows of unchecked ambition. You stand beneath the unforgiving glare of the Syrian sun, the coarse sand grinding between your teeth with every breath you take. This desolate wasteland is a cruel contrast to the lush, perfumed gardens of Alexandria you were forced to abandon. You have exchanged the silk robes of a pharaoh for the dust-covered linen of a hunted fugitive. Yet, in this brutal landscape, your mind achieves a terrifying clarity that luxury could never provide. You are stripped of sycophants, surrounded only by hard men who bleed for silver. You walk among the tents of your mercenary army, watching rough soldiers sharpen their iron blades against whetstones. They do not revere you as a living goddess, nor do they care about the divine right of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Their loyalty is tethered strictly to the weight of the gold coins you have managed to smuggle out of the capital. You realize that human allegiance is often just a financial transaction disguised as duty. You must project absolute invincibility, for the moment your funds dwindle, their swords will swiftly turn against your throat. The bitter taste of betrayal lingers in your mouth, much more potent than the desert dust. Your younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, is merely a child playing at governance, a hollow puppet dancing on the strings held by the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles. They used his innocence as a shield to usurp your rightful power, banishing you under the guise of protecting the realm. You understand that the most dangerous enemies are not those who oppose you openly, but those who stand behind the throne whispering poison into receptive ears. Does this not mirror the hidden mechanics of your own modern power struggles? How often in the polished boardrooms and political arenas of your world do weak leaders serve as mere fronts for the ruthless architects operating in the shadows? The true masters of the game rarely step into the spotlight where they might draw enemy fire. They prefer to manipulate from the darkness, deflecting all blame onto their chosen figurehead when the inevitable collapse occurs. You recognize Pothinus not as a monster, but as a master of this timeless parasitic strategy. As you formulate your plans to march on Alexandria, a tremor shakes the foundations of the known world. Messengers arrive at your camp, desperately clinging to exhausted horses, bringing news that the Roman Republic has finally torn itself apart. The great general Pompey has been utterly defeated at Pharsalus by the brilliant and ruthless Julius Caesar. The balance of global power has shifted in a single afternoon, making your local civil war seem like a minor skirmish. You realize that whoever controls Rome will ultimately determine the fate of Egypt. You learn that Pompey, the man who once reinstated your father and claimed to be the guardian of your family, is fleeing across the Mediterranean Sea directly toward Alexandria. He is desperately seeking sanctuary, hoping that the debts owed by your dynasty will purchase him a safe harbor to rebuild his shattered armies. You close your eyes and calculate the probabilities with cold precision. You know exactly how Pothinus will react to this arrival. Weak men always mistake cruelty for political pragmatism when faced with an overwhelming threat. The news confirms your darkest expectations just a few days later. As Pompey's small boat approached the Egyptian shore, he was violently murdered in front of his own wife by the assassins hired by your brother's advisors. They severed his head and left his legendary body to rot in the shallows, believing that this grotesque trophy would purchase the favor of the approaching Caesar. You feel a chilling disgust creep up your spine. Not for the dead Roman, but for the absolute lack of honor displayed by the men ruling your capital. You immediately recognize the fatal flaw in their bloody calculation. Pothinus assumed that Caesar would rejoice at the death of his rival, judging the Roman general by his own treacherous standards. But you have studied the Roman mind intensely. You know that Romans despise seeing their greatest citizens humiliated by foreigners, even if they are engaged in a bitter civil war. By murdering Pompey so cowardly, your brother's faction has not secured Caesar's gratitude. They have provoked his righteous fury. They have handed you the ultimate weapon simply through their ignorant arrogance. Consider how frequently people in your modern era fail because they project their own flawed morality onto their adversaries. We often anticipate the reactions of others based entirely on what we would do, in their position, forgetting that different cultures and brilliant minds operate on radically different frequencies. Pothinus played a cheap game of murder, blind to the fact that Caesar was playing a grand game of historical legacy. You realize that understanding the deep psychological motivations of your enemy is vastly more important than counting the number of their spears. Julius Caesar has landed in Alexandria with a small fraction of his formidable legions. He has claimed the royal palace as his temporary headquarters, demanding the repayment of the massive debts your father incurred decades ago. The capital city is now a powder keg waiting for a single spark. Your brother's armies surround the palace, trapping the greatest military commander in the world behind Egyptian walls. The tension is palpable, transcending the vast distance between your desert camp and the glistening harbor of your stolen home. You are stranded in the sweltering desert, hundreds of miles away from the only room on Earth that actually matters. If you remain with your mercenary army, you can only fight a conventional war that will slowly drain your resources and devastate the Egyptian countryside. Pothinus has direct access to Caesar, endlessly pouring lies and justifications into the general's ear, painting you as a treasonous rebel, threatening the stability of the Roman grain supply. You know that if you allow their false narrative to take root, you have already lost the war. You stare up at the cold, indifferent stars shining above the Syrian sands, searching for an answer that conventional logic cannot provide. You must bypass the armies, the spies, and the bureaucrats. You must place yourself directly in front of Julius Caesar before he reaches a final verdict regarding the fate of the Ptolemaic dynasty. But how does the most recognizable woman in the Eastern Mediterranean smuggle herself through a heavily fortified enemy capital teeming with assassins dedicated to sewing her shut inside a canvas sack? The answer requires you to abandon every precaution and embrace the absolute extreme of personal risk. You will leave your army behind in the dust. You will trust your life to a handful of fiercely loyal servants and the deceptive cover of the pitch-black night. You understand that power is never granted to those who wait safely on the margins of history. It is exclusively seized by those who willingly step into the very jaws of oblivion, armed with nothing but their own unshakable conviction. You strip away the heavy armor of a general and prepare to wear the invisible cloak of a ghost. You are about to attempt the most dangerous infiltration ever conceived by a sitting monarch. If you are caught by your brother's guards at the harbor, you will be slaughtered without haste or dignity. But if you succeed in breaching the palace walls, you will hold the entire future of the ancient world in the delicate palm of your hand. You take a deep breath and step, willingly, into the surrounding darkness. The most dangerous prisons are seldom made of stone, but are constructed entirely by our own fear of leaving the shadows. Chapter 4. True audacity does not announce its arrival with trumpets, but slips quietly through the shadows while the guards are looking at the stars. You sit in the small, rocking wooden skiff, shrouded entirely in the pitch-black darkness of a moonless night. The salty Mediterranean wind whips at your face as the massive silhouette of Alexandria's great lighthouse looms. In the distance, its flames casting long, dancing shadows across the water. Every splinter of wood beneath your fingertips feels like the edge of a blade. You are approaching the most heavily guarded harbor in the known world, surrendering your fate to the calloused hands of a single Sicilian merchant named Apollodorus. The water laps softly against the hull as you glide past the massive warships belonging to your brother's fleet. You can hear the coarse laughter of the sentries and the clatter of their iron spears drifting across the silent waves. If a single torch catches the profile of your face, you will be slaughtered before you can utter a word of defense. Your heart beats with a heavy, relentless rhythm against your ribs, but you force your breathing to remain slow and controlled. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford tonight. Apollodorus steers the small boat toward a deserted section of the royal harbor, where the towering stone walls of the palace plunge directly into the murky depths. The time for royal dignity has passed. You must now embrace complete humiliation to secure your ultimate survival. You step out of the boat and lie perfectly flat upon a rough canvas bed sack. You do not roll yourself into an expensive oriental carpet, as the romantic myths will later falsely claim. You hide inside a laundry bag, smelling of sweat and mildew. Apollodorus ties the heavy hemp ropes around the sack, binding you tightly inside the suffocating darkness. You feel the sudden lurch as he hoists you over his broad shoulder, like a common delivery of linens bound for the palace servants. The fabric scratches against your skin, and the lack of oxygen quickly makes your head spin with vertigo. Every step he takes jostles your fragile bones. You are the divine ruler of the Nile, reduced to a hidden smuggler's cargo, enduring profound physical discomfort simply to reach the chessboard. Consider the humiliations we willingly suffer in your modern world to gain access to rooms where power resides. Do modern ambitious minds not swallow their pride, masking their true brilliance beneath carefully constructed disguises, merely to slip past the gatekeepers of industry and politics? The ego is a useless burden when survival is at stake. You understand that pride must be completely sacrificed before true authority can be seized. You will endure the suffocating darkness now, so that you may command the blinding light of the sun tomorrow. You hear the muffled voices of your brother's palace guards, stopping Apollodorus at the heavy bronze gates. They demand to know what he carries with such straining effort through the quiet night. You hold your breath so tightly your lungs begin to burn with agony. Apollodorus calmly explains that he delivers important bedding for the Roman general, Julius Caesar. The guards chuckle nastily at the thought of Roman comfort, but they do not pierce the sack with their sharp iron swords. The heavy gates creak open, and you are carried inside. The atmosphere instantly changes from the cool night air to the incense-heavy warmth of the royal corridors. You hear the distant echo of Roman hobnailed boots marching across the polished marble floors. You are now moving through the very heart of your lost empire, surrounded by foreign conquerors and domestic traitors. You focus your mind on the imminent encounter, rehearsing the complex Latin syllables and the precise intonation required to captivate the most dangerous intellect in the world. You must not appear as a beggar. You must manifest destiny itself. Finally, the heavy sack is dropped onto a hard floor with a sudden thud that jars your spine. You hear unfamiliar voices, speaking rapid, sharp Latin. The rough ropes are untied, and the canvas is violently pulled away. The blinding glare of oil lamps assaults your eyes, forcing you to squint against the sudden brilliance. You slowly stand up, brushing the dust from your wrinkled linen garments, deliberately controlling every movement. You refuse to cower like a frightened fugitive. You lift your chin and stare directly into the surrounding room. Standing before you is Gaius Julius Caesar. He is 52 years old, considerably older than you anticipated, with thinning hair and deeply engraved lines of exhaustion framing his piercing eyes. He wears a simple red tunic without armor, yet he radiates an overwhelming aura of absolute, unquestionable command. He stares at you in stunned silence, astonished that a 21-year-old woman has braved certain death simply to stand uninvited in his private quarters. In this pregnant silence, you must strike the first psychological blow. You do not beg for your life, nor do you tearfully complain about the injustices inflicted by your treacherous brother. Instead, you speak to him in flawless, educated Latin. You present yourself not as a victim in need of rescue, but as a highly valuable strategic asset capable of securing his precarious position in Alexandria. You know that he is surrounded by hostile Egyptian armies and dangerously low on supplies. You offer him the only key capable of unlocking the vast wealth and loyalty of the Egyptian countryside. You watch the genuine intrigue slowly replace the surprise in Caesar's eyes. He is accustomed to dealing with weak kings who flatter him and ambitious senators who secretly plot his murder. He has never encountered a mind that mirrors his own ruthless pragmatism packaged in such a daring, unconventional form. You perceive that he respects your raw audacity above all else. He recognizes that the young woman standing before him, covered in mildew, possesses the exact same predatory instinct that drove him to conquer the entire Western world. You spend the remaining hours of the night explaining the intricate logistics of Egyptian agriculture and the hidden vulnerabilities of your brother's court. You transform yourself from a smuggled curiosity into an indispensable political partner. By the time the first rays of the morning sun penetrate the palace windows, the alliance is quietly forged in blood and iron. You have offered him the wealth of the East to finance his coming civil wars, and in return, he will lend you the invincible might of the Roman legions. History rarely turns on the edge of a clashing sword, but frequently pivots on the quiet audacity of a single conversation held in the dead of night. Chapter 5. The most dangerous room in any palace is not the dungeon, but the dining hall where traitors smile over cups of sweet wine. When the heavy bronze doors swing open the following morning, your younger brother and his advisors enter the chamber expecting a routine diplomatic audience. You stand quietly beside Julius Caesar, wearing the royal diadem that proclaims your absolute authority. The shock upon the face of Pothinus is a masterpiece of silent terror. He understands immediately that his carefully constructed conspiracy has been completely shattered by a single, calculated night. You do not smile. You simply stare at the men who hunted you like a wild animal, relishing their sudden, freezing paralysis. Your brother reacts exactly as a child playing at governance always does. When cornered by superior intellect, he tears the crown from his own head, throws it furiously against the cold marble floor, and runs weeping into the bustling streets of Alexandria. He screams treason to the gathering crowds, attempting to use pathetic tears to incite a violent mob. You watch this humiliating display from the balcony, realizing that weak men always mistake emotional meltdowns for displays of righteous power when their fragile illusions are finally broken by cold reality. But the architects of your downfall do not surrender quietly. Achilles flees to the army barracks and summons 20,000 highly trained soldiers to besiege the royal palace. You and Caesar are now completely trapped inside a gilded fortress, surrounded by a massive army intent on your utter destruction. The magnificent marble halls suddenly transform into claustrophobic prisons of impending death. You hear the constant rattle of spears against the outer gates, a relentless reminder that your brilliant diplomatic stroke has provoked a desperate, high-stakes military conflict that cannot be undone. Observe the dynamics of sudden crises in your own modern era. When a corporate boardroom or a political faction suddenly revolts, the true character of leadership is instantly revealed under the crushing weight of the siege. Many panic, making hasty decisions born solely of deep fear. But you stand beside Caesar as the enemy closes in, and you notice his breathing remains entirely steady. He does not pace or scream frantic orders. You learn in real time that absolute calm is the most intimidating weapon a ruler can wield under pressure. To prevent the Egyptian fleet from falling into enemy hands, Caesar issues a ruthless command that freezes the blood in your veins. He orders his own soldiers to set the beautiful ships ablaze in the great harbor. You stand on the high terrace, watching the towering flames devour the wooden hulls, the searing heat blistering the evening sky. But the hungry fire does not stop at the water. The wind carries the embers ashore, and you watch in silent horror as the great library of Alexandria catches the relentless spark. The accumulated knowledge of thousands of years burns into useless gray ash before your staring eyes. If you feel a profound, tearing grief deep inside your chest, for you worship intellect far above any material wealth. Yet, you must strictly discipline your trembling heart at this very moment. If you weep over burning papyrus, you will entirely lose the respect of the hard Roman standing beside you. You recognize that ultimate survival frequently requires willingly sacrificing the sacred things you love to ensure you simply live until tomorrow. While the blazing fire rages outside, treachery spreads inside the palace corridors. Pothinus is caught smuggling secret messages to the besieging army, plotting to assassinate Caesar in his sleep. Caesar does not offer him a theatrical public trial or a chance to speak in his own defense. The eunuch is quietly and efficiently executed in the shadows. You walk past the small pool of dark blood staining the polished marble floor. The man who banished you to the desert died a pathetic coward, whispering vain excuses to indifferent Roman executioners. A kingdom is never truly won until you have watched your greatest enemies bleed upon the very floors they once commanded. Chapter 6. Victory is often a deceptive mask worn over the face of a vast and incurable debt. The long and exhausting siege, finally, breaks when Roman reinforcements arrive from Syria, crushing your brother's desperate army in the muddy delta. You stand once more upon the high balcony overlooking Alexandria, watching the smoke slowly clear from the bruised sky. You have regained your father's throne, but the victory tastes heavy with ash. The city is scarred by fire, The great library is a smoldering ruin, and your younger brother lies dead at the bottom of the Nile. The gods exact a terrible price for the restoration of divine authority. You now wear the golden diadem of the pharaoh, yet you profoundly understand that your power rests entirely upon the iron swords of Roman legionnaires. Caesar remains in your palace long after the blood has been washed from the courtyards. His continued presence is both a vital shield and a constant, suffocating reminder of your subjugation. You are nominally an independent sovereign, but every decree you sign must first meet the approving gaze of a foreign general. Independence has merely been traded for a more sophisticated form of dependency. Look closely at the modern illusions of absolute freedom that define your current century. How many independent entities truly govern their own destinies without answering to the invisible weight of corporate monopolies or foreign debts? True autonomy is a comforting fiction, sold to the powerless so they do not rebel against the invisible chains that bind them. You learn to accept your golden chains graciously, smiling at your Roman protector while secretly mapping the exits of your beautiful prison. Survival requires mastering the delicate art of smiling while being extorted. To solidify your reign and demonstrate Egypt's immeasurable value to your Roman benefactor, you orchestrate a magnificent voyage down the sacred Nile. This is not a romantic excursion, despite what the bards and gossiping senators in Rome will eventually claim. It is a carefully calculated exhibition of unrivaled wealth and deep administrative control. You command a massive flotilla stretching further than the eye can see, gliding past ancient temples and endless fields of golden wheat. You must show Caesar that he needs Egypt just as desperately as Egypt needs him. You stand beside Caesar on the deck of your floating palace, pointing out the unbroken horizon of agricultural abundance. You do not show him military garrisons. You show him granaries bursting with life, sustaining sustenance. You know that Rome is a hungry beast, perpetually teetering on the brink of bread riots and mass starvation. By revealing the absolute productivity of the Nile Valley, you make yourself indispensable to his own political survival back in Italy. You are quietly transforming yourself from a conquered queen into the primary architect of Roman stability. During the quiet, starlit nights drifting upon the dark river, your strategic partnership evolves into a deeper physical bond. You conceive a child with the most powerful man in the known world. This intimacy is not born of blind romance, but of brilliant geopolitical strategy. A son carrying the blood of both the Ptolemaic dynasty and the supreme ruler of Rome represents the ultimate insurance policy. You are attempting to fuse East and West inside your own womb, creating a living bridge between the conquered and the conquerors. Yet, carrying this divine seed fills you with a new, terrifying vulnerability. You now possess a tangible weakness that your enemies can actively hunt. Your body becomes a living target for every disenchanted Egyptian noble and every suspicious Roman senator who fears the rise of an Eastern emperor. You realize that bringing a child into a global power struggle is supreme cruelty masked as love. You lie awake listening to the river, wondering if you have birthed an empire or merely signed a death warrant. When Caesar finally departs Egypt to conclude his own civil wars across the Mediterranean, the silence he leaves behind is deafening. He leaves 3 legions behind to enforce the fragile peace, but you are once again isolated in the center of a dangerous board. You must now govern a fractured nation under the suspicious eyes of Roman occupiers, while heavily pregnant with a child that Rome will ultimately refuse to officially claim. The illusion of peace has been secured, but you must pay for it every single day with your breath. The highest cost of winning a war is the exhausting requirement to constantly prepare for the next one. Chapter 7. True chaos does not announce itself with a roar, but arrives in the form of a blood-stained letter delivered in total silence. You have crossed the Mediterranean Sea to take up residence in the very heart of the Roman Republic. Caesar has housed you in his magnificent villa across the winding Tiber River, surrounding you with lush gardens and marble statues. Yet this opulence cannot mask the bitter reality that you are surrounded by enemies. The cold Italian wind pierces your linen garments, a constant physical reminder that you are profoundly far from the warming sun of Alexandria. You rule a foreign court within a city that despises kings. The aristocratic senators speak politely to your face when they attend your lavish banquets, seeking your favors and your endless wealth. But you can see the deep revulsion hiding behind their carefully rehearsed smiles. They call you the Egyptian whore in the privacy of their bathhouses, terrified by the unprecedented influence you hold over their supreme dictator. You watch them drink your wine while secretly plotting your utter destruction. You realize that the elite will always resent excellence when it arrives wrapped in an unfamiliar cultural skin. Observe the xenophobia that frequently plagues your modern world, where dominant cultures deeply fear the ascendance of outside influence. When a foreign entity displays superior intellect or concentrated wealth, the establishment instantly perceives it as a mortal threat to their traditional way of life. The Roman Senate feared that you were transforming their beloved republic into an Eastern monarchy. They did not fear Caesar's ambition nearly as much as they feared your intelligence guiding his hand. Human society always directs its deepest hatred toward the uncontrollable outsider. Caesar's arrogance reaches its absolute zenith when he erects a solid golden statue of you inside the sacred temple of Venus Genetrix. You stand in the shadows of the grand colonnade, watching the Roman citizens stare in shocked horror at your divine likeness placed beside their patron goddess. You understand that Caesar intends this as the ultimate tribute to your partnership, but you instantly recognize it as a catastrophic strategic blunder. You feel the sharp edge of envy sharpening every hidden dagger in the Senate. He has provoked the gods of Roman pride. You try to warn him in the quiet hours of the night, lying beneath the heavy woolen blankets. You whisper that a wise ruler never humiliates the nobles he has conquered. You remind him that absolute forgiveness is often mistaken for weakness, and that the men he has spared from execution will never forgive him for sparing them. But Caesar believes he is completely invincible. He has survived decades of endless warfare, and now he believes that destiny itself is his personal bodyguard. You recognize the fatal scent of hubris. The morning of the 15th of March dawned with a heavy, oppressive chill hanging over the bustling city. You sit in the sunroom of your villa, watching the gray clouds gather above the Palatine Hill. There is an unsettling stillness in the atmosphere, a quiet tension that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end. You watch your young son, Ptolemy Caesar, playing innocently on the intricate mosaic floor. You cannot shake the primal instinct that the invisible chessboard beneath your feet is about to violently crack wide open. The heavy oak doors of your chamber burst open without a polite knock. A trusted servant stands trembling in the threshold, his face drained entirely of color, his tunic torn from frantic running. He falls to his knees and gasps the words that will instantly reshape the ancient world. Julius Caesar is dead. He was butchered on the floor of the Senate House by the very men he called his closest friends. They stabbed him 23 times beneath the shadow of the statue of his defeated rival, Pompey. For one agonizing second, the entire universe stops spinning. The breath leaves your lungs, and you feel a hollow chasm open wide inside your chest. The most powerful entity on the face of the earth has been erased in a matter of minutes by a handful of iron blades. But you strictly forbid yourself from screaming or shedding a single worthless tear. Panic is a luxury reserved exclusively for the dead and the defeated. You force your mind to lock away the grief and instantly enter a mode of absolute, frigid calculation. What is true power if it cannot even protect the flesh that wears the purple toga? You realize, in that terrifying instant, that authority is nothing more than a fragile, collective hallucination. As long as men believe you are untouchable, you possess the entire world. But the second that one man is brave enough to draw blood, the illusion shines naked in the light, and the god instantly reverts back to rotting meat. You understand that you have relied far too heavily on a mortal shield that has now shattered into dust. The city across the river instantly erupts into frantic chaos. The assassins run through the streets, holding their blood-stained daggers aloft, screaming about the restoration of precious liberty. But you know that the Roman mob will not rejoice. They loved Caesar, and they will soon demand violent vengeance. You understand that as the most prominent foreigner in the city, and the mother of Caesar's only biological son, you have instantly become the most high-value target in the Republic. Your golden cage has suddenly become a burning slaughterhouse. You issue rapid, cold commands to your terrified entourage. There is no time to pack the beautiful silks or the countless gifts of gold. You instruct your guards to gather only weapons, crucial documents, and your innocent son. You look down at the small boy clinging confusedly to your silk dress. You will not allow his royal blood to stain the dirty streets of Rome. You must navigate your way out of the most powerful and dangerous city in the world while its rulers devour each other in a frenzy of murder. Under the cloak of falling darkness, you slip onto a small vessel waiting in the shallows of the Tiber River. You look back at the looming silhouette of the Roman capital, watching the torches multiply like a spreading disease across the 7 hills. You have spent years carefully building a masterpiece of geopolitical architecture, securing your dynasty through the love of a supreme dictator. Now, you are slinking away in the shadows like a hunted thief. The bitterness of this rapid descent threatens to completely overwhelm your mind. As the ship finally reaches the open water of the Mediterranean Sea, the vast and empty ocean mirrors the void inside your soul. You are traveling back to Alexandria without your Roman protector. Your homeland is suffering from crop failures and hidden rebellions. You understand that the world is about to plunge into a civil war unlike anything history has ever witnessed. You close your eyes and inhale the briny sea air. You survived the desert once. You will survive this burning ocean now. You are the pharaoh, and you will never surrender the throne. The most profound lesson of power is learning that every savior will eventually become a ghost you must outrun. Chapter 8. A throne maintained in isolation demands, a heart forged from absolute winter. You return to Alexandria, not as a triumphant queen, but as a grieving mother carrying the heavy ashes of a shattered alliance. The great harbor greets you with a somber silence. You look upon the faces of your court officials and see the thinly veiled calculations occurring behind their eyes. They wonder if the death of your Roman protector means the imminent demise of your own divine authority. You must immediately project unshakable strength to prevent the scent of vulnerability from triggering a domestic revolt. The sacred Nile has failed to rise for 2 consecutive years, leaving the golden wheat fields parched and barren. Famine creeps through the dust of the delta, whispering promises of starvation and social chaos. You cannot rely on Roman grain ships or foreign silver to appease the angry peasantry. You must empty the royal granaries and distribute the sacred reserves with absolute precision. You learn that hungry citizens do not care about imperial politics. They only revere the hand that willingly feeds their starving children. Observe the fragility of supply chains and economic stability in your modern world. How quickly does civilized society decay when the shelves become empty and the currency loses its weight? The illusion of order is sustained entirely by the consistent fulfillment of basic biological needs. You understand that governing a starving nation is vastly more dangerous than commanding troops on a bloody battlefield. Hunger strips away all polite societal fictions, leaving only the desperate and savage instinct to simply survive another harrowing day. Across the tumultuous Mediterranean Sea, the Roman Republic devours itself in a vicious new civil war. The assassins Brutus and Cassius flee to the east, extorting vast wealth from every kingdom they encounter. They send arrogant envoys to your court, demanding ships, silver, and grain to fund their hopeless republican cause. You receive their messages with a polite and frigid demeanor, carefully weighing the absolute peril of defying heavily armed and desperate men. You are walking a razor-thin wire suspended directly over an abyss of fire. You cannot openly declare war against the liberators, for their armies camp dangerously close to your borders. Instead, you employ the ancient art of bureaucratic delay and diplomatic deception. You claim that the devastating famine has entirely depleted your vast resources. You send hollow excuses wrapped in beautiful silk scrolls, apologizing profusely while secretly hoarding your ships within hidden harbors. You understand that the most effective resistance is seldom fought with drawn swords, but is often achieved through the quiet and relentless application of strategic inaction. News arrives through your vast network of spies that Caesar's true successors have finally formed a dark and bloody pact. Mark Antony, the battle-hardened general, and Octavian, the cold and calculating adopted here, have joined forces to annihilate the assassins. They authorize vicious proscriptions, murdering hundreds of wealthy senators in the streets of Rome to confiscate their vast estates. You realize that the old republic is truly dead and buried. A new, far more ruthless empire is being forged from the mutilated corpses of traditional ideals. You closely study the psychological profiles of these 2 emerging titans from the safety of your solitary throne. Octavian is merely 19 years old, yet he possesses a sociopathic calm that chills your very blood. He uses Caesar's name like a forged currency to buy the absolute loyalty of the legions. Antony is entirely different. He is a creature of immense appetites and raw military genius, ruled by passion rather than frigid logic. You begin to calculate which titan will eventually attempt to devour the other. You refuse to remain a passive spectator in this titanic struggle for global supremacy. You begin quietly rebuilding your shattered navy, constructing massive warships equipped with reinforced rams and heavy siege engines. You fill the royal treasury by ruthlessly taxing the wealthy merchants and confiscating the estates of disloyal nobles. You transform Egypt into a highly fortified and wealthy prize, knowing that whoever ultimately wins the Roman civil war will desperately need your boundless resources to govern their newly won empire. As you consolidate your absolute control over the fractured state, you elevate your very young son, Ptolemy Caesar, to the position of co-ruler. You dress the small boy in the traditional garb of a pharaoh, presenting him to the cheering multitudes as the living incarnation of the god Horus. He is your greatest asset and your most profound liability. You understand that, as the only biological son of Julius Caesar, he represents a lethal threat to Octavian's claim. You must build an impenetrable fortress of power to protect his fragile beating heart. To survive a tumultuous era of falling empires, one must become an island of absolute stone amidst an ocean of endless blood. Chapter 9. Power is never won through quiet submission, but through the spectacular display of an independence that demands absolute respect. The summons finally arrives from Mark Antony, carried by a sweating Roman messenger who hands you the scroll with trembling fingers. Antony commands you to appear before him in the city of Tarsus to answer for your supposed neutrality. During his recent war, he fully expects a terrified client queen to arrive in dust and tears. Begging for Roman forgiveness, you read the arrogant words and feel a cold smile touch your lips. You will not go to him as a subservient supplicant. You will arrive as a living goddess. Consider the dynamics of high-stakes negotiations in your modern era. Does the executive who arrives early and waits patiently in the lobby ever secure the upper hand? The individual who controls the timing and the environment dictates the ultimate terms of the agreement. You deliberately delay your departure, forcing the most powerful general in the Roman world to wait impatiently in the sweltering heat of Asia Minor. You will let his anticipation and his frustration build until he questions his own unrivaled authority. You do not assemble a traditional diplomatic convoy. You construct a floating masterpiece of psychological warfare. Your royal barge is built with timber sourced from Lebanon, featuring massive oars coated entirely in pure beaten silver. The giant sails are woven from the most expensive purple silk, catching the Mediterranean wind like a royal banner. This is not a vulgar display of personal vanity. It is a highly calculated demonstration of Egypt's immeasurable economic supremacy, designed to remind the bankrupt Roman general exactly who holds the real wealth. As you slowly sail up the Cydnus River toward Tarsus, you orchestrate an attack upon the senses of the waiting city. You burn tons of exotic incense and precious resins on the deck, allowing the wind to carry the intoxicating fragrance into the gritty streets long before your ship becomes visible. You position yourself beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, dressed deliberately to resemble the goddess Venus. Beautiful servants fanning you are dressed as sea nymphs. You are blurring the line between mortal diplomacy and divine myth. Antony waits in the bustling marketplace, sitting upon a tribunal seat, expecting you to disembark and walk through the dust to kneel before his magistrate chair. You simply drop your heavy anchors in the river and send a polite invitation for him to board your vessel for a banquet. You understand that by forcing the Roman conqueror to leave his solid ground and step into your carefully controlled environment, you instantly strip away his psychological dominance. You make him a guest within your own floating empire. When Antony finally steps onto your magnificent ship, you overwhelm his hardened military soul with boundless extravagance. The banquet tables groan under the weight of exotic meats, rare wines, and mountains of fresh roses lying knee-deep upon the deck. You serve the triumvir on intricately carved plates of solid gold encrusted with precious jewels. When he marvels at their immense value, you casually instruct your servants to give the entire collection to him as a trivial gift. You buy his utter astonishment with a single gesture. You study Mark Antony as he drinks your sweet wine, quickly realizing that he is entirely different from Julius Caesar. Caesar was cold, analytical, and driven by frigid logic. Antony is boisterous, passionate, and ruled by an insatiable hunger for grand theatricality and physical pleasure. You instantly discard the refined, philosophical mask you wore in Rome. You laugh loudly at his crude military jokes, matching his boundless energy cup for cup. You flawlessly adapt your personality to become the exact mirror of his deepest, unspoken desires. Beneath the intoxicating music and the flowing wine, you quietly negotiate the crucial survival of your ancient nation. You know that Antony desperately needs your boundless treasury to fund his impending military campaign against the fearsome Parthian Empire. In exchange for your vast financial support, you demand that he execute your rebellious sister, Arsinoe, who sought sanctuary in a distant temple. You bind his Roman legions to your Egyptian throne, transforming a diplomatic necessity into a legendary romance that will captivate the world for countless generations to come. The most lethal traps are rarely woven from heavy iron wire, but are carefully constructed from spun silk and intoxicating perfume. Chapter 10. True empires are not forged on bloody battlefields, but within the quiet chambers where ambition marries boundless wealth. You return to the magnificent city of Alexandria, with Mark Antony by your side, transforming the winter months into an unprecedented festival of luxury and strategic alliance. You introduce the hardened Roman general to the inimitable sophistication of the East, enveloping him in a world of Alexandrian scholars, exotic banquets, and deep philosophical debates. He willingly sheds the heavy, drab toga of the Roman Republic, adopting the flowing silk robes and jeweled belts of a Hellenistic monarch. You slowly reshape his identity, molding him into an Eastern king. Why do powerful men so willingly surrender their established identities when presented with absolute adoration? You realize that the human ego is a voracious entity, perpetually starved for divine validation that rigid societies seldom provide. In Rome, Antony is merely one politician among hundreds of ruthless rivals, constantly fighting for scraps of dignity. In Egypt, you elevate him to the undisputed status of a living god. By feeding his deepest psychological hungers, you ensure his sword remains permanently tethered to the defense of your ancient Ptolemaic throne. Consider the modern corporate mergers that define your present century, where giant entities fuse not for survival, but for absolute global dominance. Your partnership with Antony is the ultimate ancient merger, combining the unmatched military machinery of the West with the inexhaustible financial engine of the East. Together, you conceive a radiant vision of a new Mediterranean order, governed not by the corrupt Senate in Italy, but governed jointly from the wealthy shores of the Nile. You are giving birth to the dream of an Eastern sun. The bond between you deepens vastly when you give birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, the sun and the moon. Naming them after celestial bodies is a highly calculated geopolitical declaration. You are announcing to the known world that your dynasty aims to illuminate the entire sky, eclipsing the shadow of Roman domination. These innocent children are instantly transformed into vital political pawns, representing the fusion of two unstoppable bloodlines. You look at their sleeping faces, knowing their lives will be hunted from the very first breath. You orchestrate the donations of Alexandria, a breathtaking ceremony held in the vast gymnasium before tens of thousands of cheering citizens. You sit upon a throne of solid gold, dressed as the goddess Isis, while Antony formally distributes the conquered Roman provinces among your royal children. He grants them Armenia, Syria, and Parthia, essentially dismembering the Eastern Roman Republic with the casual stroke of a pen. This is the absolute pinnacle of your phenomenal rise. You are no longer just a queen. You are the queen of kings. Yet, every glorious action casts an equally dark and lethal shadow. Across the sea, Octavian seizes upon this unprecedented ceremony, weaponizing it to fuel a massive propaganda campaign throughout the Italian peninsula. He reads Antony's stolen will to the outraged Senate, proving that the general intends to move the capital from Rome to Alexandria. Octavian paints you as a diabolical foreign sorceress who has poisoned the mind of a noble Roman. You watch the horizon darken as the brilliant dream of the East rapidly provokes the final Western nightmare. The brightest sun emits the most blinding light right before the sky collapses into total darkness. Chapter 11. The inevitable collapse of power is seldom a sudden explosion, but the slow, heavy grinding of geopolitical tectonic plates. The air in Alexandria grows thick, with a suppressed terror that no amount of burning incense can fully mask. The reports arriving from your spies scattered across the Mediterranean paint a bleak and terrifying picture. Octavian has successfully united the fractured Italian peninsula, transforming the impending civil war from a struggle for power between two men into a holy crusade against the corrupting influence of the East. You watch your golden dream slowly twist into a justification for the total annihilation of your ancient empire. You sit across from Antony. In the strategy room, the massive papyrus maps spread unevenly across the polished marble table. His eyes, once bright with boundless ambition, now carry the heavy, dull weight of exhaustion and rising doubt. He has been cut off from the traditional centers of Roman power, relying entirely upon the mercenaries and naval fleets you have provided. You understand that the absolute dependency he once craved is now slowly eroding his military confidence. A general cannot command flawlessly when he secretly fears his own paymaster. Consider the psychological burden of sponsoring a conflict in your modern environment, whether in a boardroom or a legal battle. When you provide all the capital, you inevitably dictate the terms of engagement, often undermining the expertise of the very individuals you are attempting to support. You demand to be present at every military council, refusing to allow Antony to command in isolation. You know that Octavian's primary goal is to capture you, and you cannot entrust your utter survival to a man who might negotiate his way out by handing you over. The decision is made to confront Octavian's approaching forces near the coast of Greece, at a place called Actium. You mobilize the entirety of the Egyptian war fleet, over 60 massive galleons, to support Antony's vast array of heavy Roman warships. The financial drain upon your kingdom is catastrophic. You are essentially gambling the accumulated wealth of 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule on a single, decisive roll of the iron dice. The granaries are depleted, the treasuries emptied. There will be absolutely no second chances. As the massive fleets finally align on the shimmering water, the tension compresses the very air in your lungs. You stand upon the deck of your flagship, the Antonius, listening to the deafening creak of timber and the thunderous clatter of 100,000 oars striking the surface. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant Admiral Agrippa, does not engage in a straightforward brawl. They utilize smaller, vastly more agile ships that swarm the heavy Antonian galleons like angry wasps attacking a lumbering bear. You watch in silent horror as the meticulously planned battle rapidly disintegrates into total, bloody chaos. Antony's heavy ships, designed exclusively for close-quarters ramming and boarding, are repeatedly outmaneuvered and set ablaze. You realize, with frigid absolute certainty, that the day is hopelessly lost. A profound choice crystallizes in your mind amidst the screaming and the smoke. You can remain and die honorably aboard a sinking vessel alongside Antony, or you can break the line and desperately salvage whatever remains of your shattered dynasty. The instinct for ultimate survival decapitates the romance of a shared death without a single moment of hesitation. You signal the purple sails of your flagship to be quickly raised. Catching the favorable wind blowing southward, you command your squadron to smash through the faltering line. Turning your back on the slaughter and steeling your mind for the bitter, voyage back to Alexandria. You flee not because you are a coward, but because you understand that a dead queen can never resurrect a fallen empire. True strategy demands that you choose the humiliation of survival over the hollow glory of an honorable defeat. Chapter 12. The final act of supreme power is not conquering the world, but choosing exactly how you will leave it. You retreat into the massive stone mausoleum you preemptively constructed upon the royal grounds of Alexandria. The echo of your footsteps rebounds against the cold granite walls, a hollow sound marking the inevitable collapse of a 3-century dynasty. Outside these thick walls, the defeated city awaits the unstoppable arrival of Octavian and his victorious Roman legions. You are surrounded by boundless piles of gold, priceless gems, and exotic spices, yet you have never felt so profoundly impoverished in your entire Breton life. The news of Mark Antony reaches you like a final, suffocating wave. Believing you had already perished, the great Roman general threw his heavy weight upon his own forged iron sword. They carry his bleeding, broken body to the high window of your fortified sanctuary. You and your trembling handmaidens must physically haul his dying form through the stone opening, your silk garments stained deeply with his flowing blood. The man who once ruled half the known world takes his final, agonizing breath safely within your arms. You walk slowly through the deserted corridors of the once magnificent palace, listening to the distant shouts of plundering Roman soldiers echoing beyond the high stone walls. The countless servants and loyal guards who once swore eternal devotion have already melted away into the shadows, eager to save their own lives. You trace your delicate fingers along the intricate golden hieroglyphs carved into the great pillars. The glorious weight of 3,000 years of ancient history now rests exclusively upon your tired, slumping shoulders. You stand before a large polished bronze mirror, staring intently at the face that once commanded the complete, undivided attention of the greatest empires on earth. The myth will persist that your unmatched beauty forged your incredible destiny, but you know the absolute truth. Your weapon was never your fragile flesh. It was the relentless, calculating intellect humming quietly behind your dark eyes. You mastered the complex games of brutal men, utilizing their predictable weaknesses to protect the vibrant cultural heart of the entire world. Consider the inevitable tragedy of outliving your own, carefully constructed illusions. In your modern world, powerful figures often endure the deep humiliation of watching their empires dismantled by relentless competitors or shifting economies. When the infrastructure of your success entirely evaporates, you must confront the naked reality of your own fragile mortality. You weep for the fallen Roman, but you also cry for the immediate extinction of the Eastern dream. The intoxicating romance has violently concluded, leaving only the frigid mathematics of absolute defeat. Octavian finally marches through the once magnificent gates of your capital without encountering any meaningful resistance. He enters your dimly lit chamber, projecting the calculated mercy of a supreme conqueror. You observe his cold, empty eyes and instantly understand the terrifying truth. He is entirely immune to your legendary charm, your masterful intellect, and your vast treasury. He does not see a sovereign queen sitting before him. He merely perceives a highly valuable trophied animal waiting to be paraded through the gritty streets of Rome. When Octavian speaks, his voice is entirely devoid of the fiery passion that consumed both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. He is a frigid bureaucrat constructing a massive, soulless machine of eternal governance. He offers you false promises of comfort and royal safety, expecting you to crumble under the psychological weight of total defeat. But you see right through his transparent deception. You understand that he intends to erase your legacy completely, reducing the great pharaoh of Egypt to a pathetic footnote in his own grand myth. You vividly imagine the unbearable degradation of walking behind his golden triumphal chariot, bound tightly in heavy iron chains, while the roaring Roman mob screams vile insults at your defeated face. You understand that relinquishing your agency at this crucial moment would erase every brilliant victory you ever achieved. A divine ruler must never allow a foreign bureaucrat to write the final chapter of her sacred legacy. You decide with absolute, chilling clarity that you will steal his ultimate prize through the quiet mastery of your own death. You order a final magnificent banquet to be prepared for you and your closest loyal servants. You bathe your weary body in sweet ass's milk and array yourself in the most resplendent royal garments of the Egyptian pharaoh. A simple peasant is granted secret entry into your guarded chamber, carrying a modest woven basket brimming with ripe figs. Hidden deep beneath the sweet purple fruit lies the instrument of your ultimate liberation. You are executing the final and most flawless strategic maneuver of your entire reign. The bite of the hidden serpent is sharp, a sudden piercing sting that rapidly yields to a heavy, spreading numbness. You recline gracefully upon your golden couch, watching the world around you slowly dissolve into soft shadows. The frantic footsteps of Octavian's guards echo down the hallway, desperately racing to prevent your final escape. But you know they are already vastly too late. The venom paralyzes your flesh, but it simultaneously grants your immortal spirit an absolute, untouchable freedom that no Roman legion could ever capture. The greatest victory a captured queen can achieve is the absolute denial of her own humiliation. What is the ultimate cost of relentless power? Your extraordinary story proves that absolute ambition demands the sacrifice of innocence, the burden of paranoia, and the constant threat of violent demise. Yet you did not lose the grand game because you were weak or foolish. You simply ran out of the time the gods allowed. You forged a global empire using only the brilliant weaponry of your unmatched mind. You died not as a conquered slave, but as an undefeated queen dictating the terms of eternity. As the shadows deepen and our ancient journey concludes, I invite you to let the heavy burdens of your own reality gently fade away. If you have found solace and deep understanding in the dark corridors of forgotten history tonight, please consider subscribing to this channel for many more quiet adventures into the past. Allow the whispers of the ancients to guide you into a peaceful, undisturbed slumber. The empires of the earth will always rise and fall, but the restless human spirit remains endlessly enduring. If you were in her position, would you choose power or freedom?